Hello, this one is about communion, and so I'll go play a video.
Gavin, I'll let you go while I gather my thoughts.
The way I take notes and everything, I can kind of try to prioritize them. And the thing that I prioritize the most um, is this word communion. Um, it's it's something that I was terrible at. It's something that I noticed the skill in being able to do it. I noticed that there's limits for each person in being able to do it. We can only do it with so many people. Um, but this is the means by which a person is better known is through communion. Um, I want to throw in that if we just hop into communion, we can do it with toxic people. And so there's a way in which we can, through communion with God and with godly people, we can be disciplined. We can go through discipleship, by which we can learn to figure out our own borders, um, our own identity, and we're able to then go and be of service to people we could not have been of service to previously. So be aware of that communion. Another word might be empathy. Be aware of it. You can. It's not all safe, but there is a process of growing and transforming to be able to do it with more people. And then, yeah, in order to enter into communion with people and with God, figure out a have yourself a sacred space that you go to every morning. Uh, that's I could do a lot more, but that's all I have.
So that's what the Gavin from a couple days ago said, and then I just listened to Jonathan Pajot and John Vervaeke talk about communion. So let's hear what they have to say.
In our weird hybrid digital age, like Jonathan, you were talking earlier, like when we talk, we do actually have to breathe out, and it is my breath that sends my words to you, and then you hear it and think about it. But that's not strictly speaking true anymore, because there are these fiber optic cables that are turning my sounds into zeros and ones and then sending them in blinks along, cables at the speed of light, and then they get returned back into something statistically approximating the words that I spoke. And, it does a good enough job where it seems to kind of mostly work. But that's sort of this whole analogy for this weird world that we find ourselves in. And a lot of kind of what this little corner of the internet is how do we use sort of the forces of technology for something like a rekindling of fellowship, and how do we do that well and responsibly in this kind of extremely strange new world that we find ourselves in?
Wow. I mean, it is definitely, I think I think that it's analogous to things that have always existed, it's just that it's accelerated. People used to send each other letters. This is something that has always happened. There's always been the possibility of exchanging over distances. Obviously that has a limit. But, I think that if we see it as an extension of that, then it's not that big of a deal. But I do believe that one of the problems, of course, with the online world, which maybe wasn't as real in the world of books and letters, is that we are more easily capable of mistaking the the supplement of communion for real communion, because I can see you through the screen, and there's this sense in which maybe we're kind of in the same place, and so I think that means that we have to be more deliberate about meeting in person. We just have to, because we could do it, we could not do it. Like, we could spend our entire life talking to someone over a screen and thinking that this is a true communion. But I do believe that then we now have to be more deliberate about actually being physically in the same room, because there's something about being physically in the same room with someone that is beyond any description that I can make about what communion is. There are things happening that are beyond consciousness, right? There's smells, there's a sense of presence, there's a physicality, there's the way that you cast a shadow. There's all these things that are part of community. It's hard to say because you think, oh, well, that's meaningless, right? Well, no, it's not. There is this, the liturgical element is the dance that you have with someone in some ways has to be, I think, physically embodied. I don't think that it can be completely real in this digital space. So that's why I mean these conferences I think are wonderful. The fact that people are doing, that are meeting locally, fractally at least, and doing these groups, I think is a great idea. But we have to be deliberate about it.
So I agree with that. I want to first build on it. The brain, and this is one way in which it's unlike our current machines, does encoding specificity. Because the brain is so drenched in relevance realization, it stores as much of the context. So take a test, learn the information in a room, divide all the people up. Half the people come back to the same room. Half the people go to just a different room just down the hall. Right. And the people that come to the same room on average do better because the brain is storing the entire context, because it's trying to hedge its bet on what might turn out to be relevant in the future. It's a very, very powerfully adaptive. And so all of that goes into, you're right. We're losing so much of the capacity for encoding specificity when we're meeting virtually. I think this is going to become super important. This is what I keep saying to people, and really frustrates certain groups that have sort of historically followed me when I say theology is the science of the future, because
Queen of sciences.
Yeah.
That's what we called her.
But of course, I think it's going to be a post-Kantian Neoplatonic theology, not what theology's been since the Enlightenment, by and large. I think with VO and Claude 4, the virtual is coming alive. The medium is becoming alive in a way that is starting to exceed us. So one of the things
and then they go into a topic which I haven't listened to yet, but it looks like it's an interesting one on artificial intelligence. But they discussed communion and technology. And so, and they mentioned the average person. They mentioned kind of the importance of the being in person with smells and sounds and things like this. The thing that comes to mind is the person who is unable to meet in person. And I don't believe, I'll put it even stronger, I know that it is possible to enter into communion in the digital space. And so I don't want people who are unable to meet in person to believe a lie that communion can only happen when we meet in person. And so that's the big point and the big disagreement. The caveat, where I will give them credit, is that meeting in person in a specifically engineered and designed space, perhaps a sacred space with specific kinds of people, can facilitate communion better. So there's a lot of variables there in determining how accessible communion is, but it is possible in the digital space, and it really depends on who is there. And to push back on Jonathan Pajot, to compare technologies like Discord and Zoom and StreamYard with books and letters is not fair. And to emphasize a point John Vervaeke made is that the mind, that there are differences. He didn't make the point directly, but indirectly it's there, is that when he talks about an average person, there are people spread across spectrums. There's a diversity of people. And so what could be conducive for communion in an Orthodox church and that sacred space can be distracting for some types of minds and some types of people. And a digital space could be better for certain people than it is for others. And then likewise, on the other side is that Eastern Orthodox sacred space, or the estuary at the conference where John Vervaeke, Jonathan Pageau, and Sam Tideman will be, that could be a more conducive means for communion for many people. So there is a non-duality even here in communion, which is most important. It is more important than truth. And so entering into communion with God and neighbors, and even loving an enemy, which is not communion, but is halfway there, because the enemy isn't guaranteed to love you back. Communion is this loving the other and they are loving you. So when you love an enemy, it's not going to be communion. But this love, this thing that we do, which is love. And by the way, as we enter into communion with God and neighbors, we will develop our capacity to love our enemies. This is most important. This is what Jesus taught, and is even, I would say, more important than the kinds of truth that we learn in education systems, in the modern education systems. It's more important than worldviews, because worldviews are important because they feed into our capacity to love, but we can test love. We can run experiments and we can test love, but we don't have good ways to test our worldviews when our worldview is divorced from love. So I just figured I would chime in. I'll link to the conversation that Sam Tideman facilitated between John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pageau. And in the description on that video, you can find more information for the conference where they will be. Have a good day. Thank you for your time and attention.